Voice Teacher Podcast.
Hi there, and welcome to the Voice Teacher Podcast. I'm Amy Geddes here with Sam Johnson, and today we have an exceptionally special guest for you. We have Ken Bozeman. He is a world-renowned voice pedagogue, and we are privileged to have him on our show. Let's have a big round of applause for Ken. Woo!
It delayed.
Oh, it didn't go.
There it is. We're still learning stuff. Anyway, thank you so much, Ken, for coming on. Yeah, first off, just could you tell us a little bit about how you got into voice teaching?
Well, I grew up, basically, I took piano as a child, didn't take voice lessons until I got to college, was very involved in a church music program and in school choirs and so forth, and school musicals, and went to college thinking I would probably be a church musician, but very, very quickly, I really had not experienced much classical singing until I got to college, other than the sort of version of it that I got in the church music program in the school choirs, but certainly no full-blown, developed professional voices. And I was immediately fascinated by what the human voice could do, because my primary history was in classical, although I played in, I had a folk group in high school, and was singing all the popular things and played guitar and did all that. And that was all great fun, but I hadn't experienced unamplified, powerful singing of a classical sort. And that fascinated me. And so I very quickly switched to being a classical voice major. I was always a kind of a student type, a little bit of an academic type, though I sang it feeling fully. I didn't sing that way. So I sort of just gradually headed more and more towards, and I had piano skills. So it just kind of led me in that direction gradually. And when I graduated, I had an undergraduate and master's. I did a year in Germany on a Rotary Fellowship, and then came back another year. In my own vocal journey, I knew that I wasn't ready to try to be an opera singer, because even though my voice had developed quite a bit, I still knew that I couldn't sustain the athleticism needed for that career. But I also knew that I was really an academic type and loved that setting. And I had been teaching some. And so that just kind of went in that direction. And I continued to work out my own voice as I learned and taught and so forth. So that's the short version of how I got into it.
That is so exciting. I mean, everybody I think all voice teachers follow a little bit of a similar path, but we all kind of find it in our own way. So I was reading in one of your articles, and it talks about how you had a couple of big turning point moments. One where you kind of sang through that first passaggio and didn't feel it turn over till later. I'm sorry if I get this wrong, but that was kind of a big point for you. Can you tell us more about that? Kind of explain what those awakening moments were for you in your singing.
So my interest in the acoustics and how that works with voice probably actually began when I first heard a recording of Jussi Björling singing "Ah Love But a Day" by Amy Beach. And there's a point in which he goes from an ah vowel, from an E flat up to an A flat into his upper voice. And this amazing color change occurs. And this was on the LP. I had gotten an LP back in the day when there were LPs more. It's coming back, actually. And I was like, what is going on? Wow, what is he doing? I've got to figure out what he's doing. That's how you get into the upper voice with that wonderful, sound. Let me think about this. About 10 years later, I was at a Nats conference in Minneapolis, and Tom Cleveland played a synthesized tenor voice singing an ah vowel on an F major scale. And it did that color change near the top. And so I ran up and I asked him, what did you program in the synthesizer to create that color change? He said, man, I didn't do anything but change the pitch. I realized he had set the formants, which I had learned about by that point, and just the pitch change moving through those formats caused that color change. And that was probably my first big aha moment, but I didn't know what to do with it yet. That was like in 1981. I thought, it's acoustic, it's not laryngeal. But I didn't know what to do with that. So then in a lesson with Richard Miller, I was covering a sabbatical at Oberlin in 1989, and I was in a lesson with Richard, and I had read his material on the zona di passaggio, this transition zone, that he said for a tenor it's like D to G. So I assumed that my voice would turn over and go into the top at about a G. Although, if I'd been more careful in my thinking, I had already noticed that my A vowel was turning over on about an E flat. I thought,
Your
that's
a
interesting.
or eh?
Eh. It was in a German song. Anyway, I thought, oh, that feels better when I let it do that. So I was letting it do that. So was already working things out, but without specific understanding. Anyway, I was singing an A vowel in this lesson with Richard Miller, and it turned over on D4. And it was a rather unusual sensation because I had been opening my A vowel and delaying its turn, which is very typical strategy that people do. Like in Messiah, tenors will often sing instead of plain, they'll sing plain, plain. It's a plain, and let it turn. And I said, Richard, what was that? Was that okay? He said, what was what? I said, what that A vowel just did. Said, I don't know, do it again. I did it again. I said, yes, fine. But he knew what
It's
it
so
should sound
casual
like.
from him whenever it's like a big breakthrough for us.
Right. He knew what it was supposed to sound like,
Yeah.
but none of us knew what I began to observe. So I went back. I had helped set up his lab there. He had gotten a KLMetrics 5500, which was a very fancy computer that did spectrography, and it was very expensive. And I set it up and I rehearsed. I would practice in that lab. And I went back to the lab and I said, my A vowel is turning over there. And I started playing with other vowels. I said, my vowels are turning over in some kind of parallel relationship to what I've seen first formant relationships being plotted in graphs in Sundberg and other places. And I said, well, that would mean my oo and my o vowel would be turning over way down here. And I went down there and I go, yeah, wow, yeah. So anyway, that was when I made my first big observation that acoustic events are triggering what we've been calling turning over, covering, all these things, and they vary by vowel. It doesn't happen at the same vowel, the same place for every vowel, which I think has sort of been the thinking of a lot of us. Well, your voice turns over on pitch blank. No, that's where your A vowel turns over, and your A and O vowel turn over about a step lower than that, and your A and your O vowel turn over about a fourth lower than that, and your E and oo almost an octave lower. Anyway, so I started playing with those ideas, and it transformed my teaching, particularly of young, male voice, like bass, baritone, and tenor voices right away. And then I started trying to figure out what it would mean for higher voices, and I gradually put it all together. But I didn't actually write about it until 2007, 18 years later. I did a few presentations, a poster and so forth before that. But the first time I actually wrote in the Journal of Singing was 2007, A Case for Voice Science in the Voice Studio in the Journal of Singing. And then I started getting invitations to write more about it, and I did. And then in 2013, I wrote my first book, Practical Vocal Acoustics. And in 2017, Kinesthetic Voice Pedagogy. And then in 2021, a second edition of Kinesthetic Voice Pedagogy that's about twice as long. And I continue to learn implications of all of this, but it totally transformed.
Didn't some new book just come out, or a new version?
That's actually just a reissue of the first book that's hardly any different. The first publisher went under COVID and everything else. And so it was taken over by Nats and Roman and Littlefield. So they've reissued it, fortunately at a very attractive lower price. They eliminated color on the inside, so it's all black and white, which is fine. But I put on my Facebook place, they gave me a discount code. They're offering it for $40, but with a discount code, you get another 30% off. So like $28,
Oh,
which
that's
is a
great.
great price for, most of it.
Yes.
Yeah, we'll put the discount code in the show notes, and I cannot recommend this book enough. It was one of the first, it made so many aha moments, because I had been kind of not seriously researching acoustics, but it's been just part of the consciousness for a little while. And as soon as I saw that book, it really puts a lot of things together. So thank you so much for writing that.
I may eventually, we'll see if I have the energy for it, write a second edition for that one. But meanwhile, it's basically still what I think. I've continued to learn things, of course, and adjust as we learn, we adjust. But yeah, so that's the story of my journey largely.
Awesome. So jumping back just a second, when you were noticing those vowels were turning over at unexpected places, what were you perceptually doing to allow that to happen? What did you consciously change?
Well, probably it's fair to say that they first happened more or less accidentally. But basically, if you leave the if you have a good resonant shape for a vowel at speech level, like a, and you leave that shape alone, as you ascend, the harmonics from the pitch you're singing will move through the resonances of your vocal tract, especially when harmonics move through the first resonance, which is the lowest one, which is sort of like the dominant resonance. Acoustic shifts occur, like turning over, turnings or closings, every time a harmonic rises through that. So basically, if you if you know where the first resonance of a vowel is, and for example, for an A vowel, mine is at about C sharp 5. Well, an octave below that, if I'm singing the pitch an octave below that, my second harmonic is interacting with that resonance. If I'm singing an octave and a fifth below that, my third harmonic is interacting with that resonance. If I'm singing 2 octaves below that, my fourth harmonic is in, you just take the harmonic series and flip it upside down, and you can predict where all of those intersections are going to occur, and then you start noticing them, which is the real thing. Basically, you just want to feel it. We singing is procedural learning. Declarative learning is the stuff we can talk about and then we can put into words. It's sort of more or less the so-called objective stuff. But the know how to do it is the felt knowledge. Sort of like the how do you ride a bike? That's procedural knowledge. It's really hard to describe in words, but you feel it. You feel what you're doing. That's the gold. That's what we're after as singers. That felt somatosensory knowledge and auditory, the sounds and sensations of it is what we're really looking for. And we do have to declaratively try to describe it. What else can we do? It's sort of like I can describe how an orange tastes with words that are trying to use terms of similar things that you've experienced, like you've experienced sweet, you've experienced tangy, wet, but until you've tasted an orange, you don't really know what an orange tastes like. So it's like that.
You're
with
making my
singing.
mouth water.
Yeah,
I know. I'm like, can we have oranges
describe
next?
the sensations of a turn and help you, explore that. But until you feel it, you don't really know procedurally what it feels like. And that's the whole challenge of teaching, is to use words. And well, let me back up a second. We are vocal learners. We are one of 8 species on the planet so far that we realize are vocal learners. Vocal learners are able to learn new sound patterns from their mentors and from their surroundings. All the rest just make whatever sounds they came pre-programmed with. Vocal learners learn in the wild utterly by imitation. There was a period where voice teachers say, well, don't try to imitate someone else. You'll just impose on yourself. Well, actually, that's how vocal learners learn. Also, by voice is done in response to the impulse to express feelings. So in its rawest, most primal form, we just express feelings with our voice. That's how we communicate to other humans in order to connect with them and get from them empathy and help as babies, right? The help we need or empathy. So it's really the basis. The argument has been made that it's the basis of civilized society. If I can get you to feel what I'm feeling, you might not be my enemy. You might be willing to be my friend. You feel for me. And so that's really kind of the basis of civilization. Anyway, so I use affect, expression of feeling, and somatosensory targets to teach voice. I happen to know a lot about the acoustics and what the targets need to be, but I don't talk formants and harmonics in lessons much at all, if ever. I talk expression, but I use the affects that achieve those targets that I've learned about. So, for example, and all the great teaching in the past used what I would call somatosensory descriptive language, right? Like you think of the old Italian school of teaching, they talked about voce chiusa, closing. Well, what is closing? It's an acoustic sensation. They were using declarative language to describe a procedural phenomenon. Oh, when I feel something kind of concentrates all of a sudden instead of spreading, right? Instead of going to the yell, it goes like that. So if I go ya ya ya, so ya ya, something gets more concentrated feeling. Yeah, they call it closing, voce chiusa. All these terms, they talked about head voice, chest voice. What were they talking about? Where they were feeling vibrations, somatosensory descriptions. We have really no other alternative. I'm really rambling on here, but let me go back to the objective subjective thing. There's no such thing as an objective experience. All human experience is subjective. We experience reality via our senses, in our perception of various senses. So it's already subjective from the get-go. Now, I believe that there is an objective reality out there that we are experiencing. Some philosophers argue about that. But our experience of that objective reality out there, the hard things that, is somatosensory. It's sensational and therefore subjective. So those that argue that we need to be using more objective language in our pedagogy don't really have a leg to stand on. I agree that we need to try to figure out as best we can what the objective realities are. Very helpful. Very helpful to know my A vowel turns over on C sharp, right? Very helpful to know that. But how I do it is going to be very subjective. So objective language is very good for trying to describe the objective reality, but it's practically useless as an intentional directive for singing. I don't
Wow.
tell my singers, I need more first formant, second harmonic. I don't do that kind of stuff. I'll talk about how it's going to feel and sound and seem, which is subjective perception.
So with that, do you find any difficulty with your singers like aiming for a sensation and almost feeling like they're not getting it right if they don't get the sensation that someone else has described, even if like their sensation might be slightly different?
Right. So this is a fair but exaggerated criticism of using sensations, whether you want to call them placement sensations or tactile, vibrotactile sensations. The criticism is, well, everybody feels things differently. Well, let's wait a minute on that. We all go outside and we look at the sky. I would argue that most people with normal sight will agree that the sky looks blue. That is an utter subjective sensation. That is a perception of our eyes. But I haven't met anybody that wants to argue that it's red if we have a clear sky. Now, it may be useful to learn the science of why we perceive the sky to be blue when we know air is, in a sense, colorless, but the light coming through it is refracted in such a way that our perception perceives it as blue. So it's fine to know about the objective science underneath it. There is huge overlap between sensations, between people. Yes, there is variety, but there is huge overlap. So I reject being dismissive in using subjective sensations because everybody feels it differently. Well, yeah, you have to qualify it, and yet you can't force on someone to do, you have to allow it and have conversations with the individual so that they're not trying to force something that's not their perception. But most people are going to feel head voice vibrations more in their head and chest voice vibrations more in their chest. And, and somewhere in between, they might feel it, pharyngally. And we don't have to avoid that kind of terminology as long as we're not sort of rigid about it.
I think some of it is also just making sure that you're on the same page as your student about
Yeah.
what language they use to talk about it. Because even if they're feeling it very similarly, their language might be drastically different.
Exactly. And so you always invite from them. I always say, what is that like for you? What are your words
Mhm.
for that? Because how you perceive something, because this is true, is largely a matter of how your brain is attending to the phenomenon. A good example of that is if you know of Wolfgang Zaus, the harmonic singer who teaches harmonic singing. He's brilliant. He's the teacher of Anna Maria Hefele. If you're familiar with her, she's a harmonic
Mhm.
singer, overtone
Okay.
singer. Check him
Okay.
out on YouTube. They're amazing. He's brilliant. He has a little YouTube where he can teach you to hear spectrally. What is hearing spectrally? Where you hear harmonics rather than, we tend to hear from the language part of the brain. So we hear sound, colors all blended together. I'll give you a simple example. You might have I'm going to use metaphorical language here, okay?
That's
Say you
great.
have a yellow harmonic and a blue harmonic. Well, you would probably hear that as green, is all blended together. A person that hears spectrally, like harmonic singers learn to, they hear a yellow harmonic and a blue harmonic. They don't hear them blended. So here's a little YouTube where he can teach you to hear a tune in a phrase of vowels. What you're hearing is the second harmonic. You're not the second harmonic. You're hearing the second formant. The harmonic being featured by the second formant, which we normally just hear all blended together as part of the timbre, not as a separate tune. Well, your brain can learn to attend to the sound differently and start hearing harmonics. And that's utterly a matter of how your brain is attending to the phenomenon. Therefore, people will have varied descriptions and experiences of the same phenomenon depending on how their brain is attending to it. Think of optical illusions. If you look at a sheet of paper with some image on it and you see it one way, someone else sees it the other way.
Mhm.
And usually with enough coaching, you can trigger yourself to flip and see the opposite way, but it depends on how your brain was attending to it. So that is a valid concern in using perceptual phenomena, and it depends on how you're attending to it. But still, there's enough reliability of it. And as long as you're having conversations and not forcing, and helping the student, guiding them, you can work through that, because there's no such thing as a direct objective access to this phenomenon. It's not this, it doesn't exist.
Oh, okay. So you were talking about, this was, sorry, probably like 20 minutes ago, but this was fascinating to me because I kind of feel like I do a lot of this with my own students. But you were talking about when you left the vowel alone, you didn't change anything, and you allowed the pitch to
Left
change
the
and turn
vowel shape
the shape
alone.
of the vowel. Okay, so when you're teaching somebody to do that, what kinds of cues do you give them? What do you tell them? Because I feel like I do something similar. I tell them, okay, this is what we're trying to leave alone. This is what we're going
Right.
for. How do you describe that to your students, and how do you help them, leave it alone or basically not change it?
So first of all, huge qualification. That's for pitches below the first resonance of a vowel. For pitches above the first resonance of a vowel, I actively modify. There are instances below that where you can use active vowel modification for various reasons, but you don't have to in order to have a full balanced tone. So in treble voices, they do a lot more active vowel modification, which is basically mouth opening mostly. I say things like, suggest the vowel, insist on the affect. So babies explore their range, or toddlers explore their range without going for a particular vowel target. They haven't learned language yet. So they're just exploring what feels good, right? E, yeah. But they are doing feelings. So I say explore the feeling throughout your range. Start with a vowel shape, and then kind of almost you can play with forget about it. So say I'm doing an ah, 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 and then all of a sudden go off to a wonderment and forget about the ah. Just leave the mouth alone. Ah, you hear that go right? Ah, ah. He goes through exactly the same shape. Oh, oh. Why in the world we think that second one is actually tracking an O vowel? I have no idea. It isn't an O vowel, but that's our instinct to go for the yell. Ah, oh. No, they're all migrations. They're just different kinds of migrations. And that's because of spectral tone color. Thank you, Ian Howell. Frequencies have a vowel-like tone color. And when you change pitch, you change the set of tone colors you're painting with. And that set of, they're moving through resonances of the vocal tract. So it's impossible to make exactly the same timbre on two different pitches. It can be so gradual that you don't notice and it seems the same, but it's still migrating. Ah, that was two different sounds. Now if I tried to make it the same, ah, that's also different.
But
It's just
it's
different
so
in a different way.
fascinating that like that feels like it should be more similar, but it sounds so much more different. And I think that's a big struggle that I definitely had and continue to work through, is that to get your voice to sound the same all the way through, you have to let it change in those
Yep.
ways. And tracking those timbral shifts has been way more useful to me than trying to make it the same. But yeah, it's really tough.
We chase the target vowel timbre, which we derive from our speaking range, and we try to chase that timbre up the range, and that's going to result in strain usually. Too much pressure, too much strain. And of course, we want it to still sound, speech-like enough that it doesn't sound unusual to our listeners. We want them to believe it, but we have to be careful with that, because if we chase we chase both the timbre and the sensation from speech level up the range, and that's not going to work.
Mm-hmm.
We have to let things migrate, and they will concentrate, which speech level singing talks about the narrowing sensation. That's the closing sensation. And it doesn't have to be done physically. You just don't widen physically, just leave it alone. But the sensation has got to collect and narrow as it closes, which is, again, a description from Italian pedagogy, which is just a description of a sensation, an acoustic sensation, not a muscular closing. Every vowel, every step changes. And you can, if I do an I mean, it's just migrating, every vowel, especially when they cross, when one of its harmonics of the pitch you're singing crosses the first resonance of the vowel you're singing. So E is really low. E, E. You're a lot more of the E, which is the undervowel, the U plus the E. So I have to start opening the E vowel really soon if I want to preserve timbre in that one. So I would do an E, E, a high E, E. It's that shape, but up high, E. That's an active modification.
And it's just wild that it sounds like E up top and it sounds
Right.
like E at the bottom.
And from counterscoder whispering, why?
Yeah.
You can identify the second formant target with counterscoder whispering. That I'm on my Bluetooth at the moment. Are you able to hear that higher pitch? It should be a B. I don't know how to turn my keyboard off. It should be a B, A, D. Now I'm going to open my mouth to actively modify it while retaining that pitch. I can even do my pop face. But I'm still playing E. But listen to what it sounds like. E, E. At speech level, it's heavily modified, but that's going to come out sounding like an E vowel up high. And the other thing is you're trying to, basically, if you want to avoid a spread yell timbre, and doing a good imitation of a yell timbre is really important for a lot of genres. And why is that? Because yelling is very emotional. And those genres are going for that raw emotional sound, but we got to do it in a way that doesn't destroy the instrument, right? Because a raw yell is pretty hard on the vocal folds. So you can do that where you get a nice high enough tongue dorsum so you get some good acoustic feedback that keeps this more comfortable than the spread E, E, instead of E, E, E. Somewhere I was going with. Oh, so I want to move my sound percept to more in the center. If you track your pharyngeal column, you can put 2 fingers on your sternal notch and a couple of fingers at about where your TMJ is, your temporomandibular joint. That's about the plane of your pharynx. Put the bright part of the sound in that plane. E, A, instead of out in the front of your mouth. E, A, E, A, E. You can do the, forgive my French, the hell yeah, damn right affect. Yeah, E, yeah. For your more pop styles, a lot of that yeah is going to be way easier than yeah with this, yeah. Very, that nose scrunch, eye squint look that you see so often from people. Yeah. Because it's a really good pharyngeal tuning, but it's very pharyngeal. It's here. It's not so much about what's in front of the tongue. It's that feeling from there to there behind the tongue. And classical singers use a version of that with maybe not quite as much of the facial part.
Thank you so much for watching and listening so far. Our conversation with Ken just got totally carried away, so we're going to cut this into 2 sections. Come back next week and listen to the rest of this. We've got some incredible things that he said from just one of the most, I think, important pedagogues of our time right now. He's had such wonderful impact and very lucky to have him here. Yeah, thank you so much for listening.
Thank you for listening to the Voice Teacher Podcast, brought to you by IFTOM, International Voice Teachers of Mix. Your co-hosts are Sam Johnson and Amy Geddes. Learn more about IFTOM at iftom.org and find Sam Johnson at vocalese.net and Amy Geddes at breakthrough-studios.com. Voiceover and theme song by Maz Mazak, and this podcast is edited by Amber. You have been listening to
The Voice Teacher Podcast.